Okay, morning again. Good morning. Welcome to the Property and Investments Executive Subcommittee meeting on Tuesday, the 28th of January. We're here in the John Meikle Room of the Dean House. My name is Councillor Liz Lyshan. I'm chairing this meeting today as the Leader of Council, Councillor Bill Revans, sends his apologies. So I will get to that when we cover apologies. Just to remind those present that it is only the subcommittee members present in the room that are taking the decisions at the meeting. Others are in attendance to provide advice. The agenda and papers have been published on the council's website in advance of the meeting. I saw a message flash up and I didn't catch it.
It's me, Liz. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I could just see you had someone on hold, that was all.
Okay, Mike, are you able to deal with that?
Sorry, Liz.
Okay, if you can keep an eye on anyone waiting for admittance, please. So the agenda and papers have been published on the council's website in advance of the meeting, and we'll try to make sure we cover, when we're working from a supplement, we'll try to be really clear about which supplement we're on. So we're running the meeting today using a hybrid format. Subcommittee members are physically present in the room. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or observe the meeting. The meeting is being broadcast and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. Please use the meeting chat function as always only for the purposes of the meeting, primarily to indicate that you wish to speak, or use the hands up function on Teams. Please only speak at the chair's invitation and please say your name before speaking if I haven't already introduced you by your name, which I hope I will do. And please also, of course, turn off your microphone and camera when you're not speaking. So we'll move straight to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. And as I've indicated, Councillor Bill Revans has sent apologies and Councillor Theo Butt-Philip is substituting. Councillor Richard Wilkins also sends apologies as he's chairing the bus board today at the same time. In the room we have Councillor Mike Rigby, Councillor Theo Butt-Philip, myself and Councillor Sarah Wakefield. We go now to item 2, which minutes from the previous meeting on the 29th of October. So these minutes are part the public part of the meeting and part the confidential part of the meeting from the 29th of October. If anybody wishes to raise any matters from the confidential minutes, please don't raise them now. Raise them later in the meeting when we're in confidential session. If colleagues who were present on the 29th of October are satisfied that those minutes are a true record, I would ask for a proposer and a seconder, please. So proposed by Sarah Wakefield, seconded by Mike Rigby. I'll take it from them as they're the full members of this subcommittee. No offence intended, Theo. So all in favour of accepting both sets of minutes? Thank you very much. We have now item 3, declarations of interest. So those members who are also on city, town, parish councils, of course, that's available for inspection on the website. Any other declarations of interest? Nothing else? Thank you. So now item 4, public question time. I'll just check, but I understand there are no public questions today. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just refer at the moment to the fact that item 7, the future investment property disposal paper, has been deferred to a later meeting. And now I move to item 5, which is to note the executive forward plan. Now, I do recall that one item was on the executive forward plan for this subcommittee, but it's on the agenda today. So you'll not see any items on the executive forward plan for the subcommittee at the moment. However, others will be added as needed, as and when needed. So we'll go now to item 6, which is a review of performance indicators for the investment portfolio and the main risks to the programme. This is on supplement number 1, pages 3 to 12. And I'm going to ask Councillor Mike Rigby to introduce the item and highlight key points before he hands over to Robert Orrett. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just preface this item very briefly to say that we as a subcommittee are responsible for making sure that there are appropriate governance arrangements in place. And one of those things is that we have key performance indicators to make sure that the programme is meeting its requirements. And I'll just run through briefly the performance indicators that we're recommending to be monitored by the subcommittee on a quarterly basis are total contracted annual income, void measure as a percentage of rent, rent arrears measure, and progress with property disposals. And there's a series of recommendations to come, but I'll hand over to Robert to say a little more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Rigby says, these are regular indicators that we use, and they really cover two different aspects. The three KPIs in Table 1 are to do with the continuing management of the portfolio, which is the core activity of our team, and then Tables 2 and 3 are specifically monitoring the programme of disposal, which is the direction that we're working on at the moment. So the three indicators that Councillor Rigby mentioned there, they get a little bit complicated now we're in the process of disposing of assets, because effectively the base data is changing. So particularly for total contracted income, we identify a nominal and a real measure, and the nominal is comparing change against the original rental base as if we hadn't sold anything, and there we are just the most minute amount up, so 0.1% increase in contracted income. The real measure is 11.9% lower than when we last reported, and that is specifically because we have completed the sales of the assets that are listed in the comments box. So as we sell, almost always when we sell property investments, they are fully rented at the time, so it would be disadvantageous to sell with a vacancy factor. So almost always they have a full rent when we sell, and obviously when we sell we lose that revenue from the particular asset. Moving on to voids, we've given the guidance that a good level of voids across an investment portfolio would be in the range of 5 to 10%. The current void rate has gone up since the last meeting, so we're up to 9.99%. So we're just on our upper guide for good. I think that I'm right in saying it will actually be likely to rise further at the next time we report, because we've got a tenant break notice on one of the assets, so we'll lose that tenant. But equally, as we reported previously, we have letting transactions going on and concluding, so it's a kind of balancing between the two. Then lastly, rent arrears, we report on them over 90 days because otherwise it's very volatile. If we happen to have a meeting that's a week after a quarter day, we might have quite a high level, so we kind of take out the short term. We have reduced the rent arrears from 1.34% down to 0.74%, so it's kind of getting down to almost nothing, and that has been helped by the decision we made last summer to move the remaining properties that we were managing in-house to our external managing agents, because they have dedicated property management systems that we don't actually have within the council, and they have more resource to put onto arrears chasing when necessary. In terms of the disposal progress, I'll only talk to table 2. Table 3 is the same data in a different format, and this is the aggregate portfolio position. So the blue bar shows the aim that we have for this financial year, seeking to achieve and complete disposals of £80 million worth of assets, and you'll remember the base is about 200 billion, so it's about 40% of the value of the portfolio. The cutoff for this particular chart, we updated it, I think, at the beginning of last week, because we had a completion the previous Friday. So we are currently have sold and received the proceeds for just short of 72 million. So we're pretty close to the aim for this year. We have a further 21 million of transactions, so that's 5 different assets in solicitors' hands, advancing towards sale. And confidence, you assume it's going to happen, but it's not until you exchange contracts. It's not guaranteed. We had one that felt like it was nearly there, that the buyer withdrew a week ago because they were dependent on raising external finance, and the particular lender they went to is quite fussy, and some fairly mild issues they weren't prepared to lend against, and so there is that risk, and it's quite lumpy that we could lose, but we're pretty confident that we will complete more than the remaining 8 million and get to the £80 million objective for this year. And any that don't happen, it's about slippage. It's not that the asset isn't saleable, but effectively we have to go back and achieving market value, best consideration, whatever it's labelled. Kind of being able to be patient is really important. That the market is still quite patchy, and sometimes you just have to hold your nerve and wait till you finally manage to secure proper interest, and yeah, not chase it, because if you do, then your impatience gets exploited. I think that's all I need to say, Chair.
Thank you very much. We are, of course, only a couple of months away from the end of financial year now. And if I could just, before I go to colleagues for questions, can I just check with you what you said about the rental collection system now being with an external provider? So I just asked that because in the auditor's annual report for 23-24, that is referenced in that report. And so I'm really glad to hear that confirmed by you today. Thank you very much. So colleagues, questions? I've got Sarah first, please.
Magic touch, really. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I'm glad to see that the rent arrears have gone down, and I just wanted to, my first question about that was, if we have tenants who are quite kind of national, well-known companies, they, in my view, tend to just pay on the quarter day automatically. So presumably it's usually the smaller, less well-known ones that you end up chasing, but you can correct me if I'm wrong about it. That's my first question. Sorry.
As a generalization, you're right, but you do get national companies who've decided to employ a service charge minimization consultant or something like that, and it just jams up the works for a period, and they're perfectly entitled to do that. But yes, you're right, normally the corporates, they pay pretty automatically because there are effectively legal disadvantages for them, not just paying interest on arrears, but they can prejudice their ability to operate tenant break options if they get rent arrears. So it's the same ones that feature. We have very few small tenants in this portfolio. They're predominantly corporates, and they do mostly pay very well.
My second point was about the table 2. Does that really just show the aim for this year and what's happening now? Because yeah, we had an aim and we've getting pretty close to it, but in the marketing area, there's not that many property or not that much value shown. So I just wondered whether that's a sufficient amount of marketing moving forwards. And it doesn't talk about next year. So I just wondered whether there was, much there in the pipeline.
The table absolutely is confined to this year's programme. So the entirety of what we currently have on the market has an aggregate value of about 105 million. We have properties identified that we expect to market next year. From memory, we've identified about 50 million pounds worth of assets. Some of those are not immediately ripe for marketing because we are just concluding asset management, and for by the time we have a meeting financial year, we will have worked out how to present the programme spread over the years, but the focus for now has been on the current financial year.
Yes, and do we have a target for next financial year?
Through you, Chair, we are working on what we will require for the next financial year. The capital flexibility's use of capital strategy is already in the public domain and will make its way through, and that has outlined a requirement for capital receipts in order to be able to capitalise revenue expenditure.
Okay, thank you. So could I just ask you, just for the sake of all members, exactly what asset management encompasses? I presume it's the management of the assets, but just explain to us what that management includes, please.
I will. So as a piece of jargon, I'd say we have two components. We have property management, which is normal day-to-day stuff, and really that is mostly rent collection or collecting service charges and insurance. We don't have any assets in the investment portfolio where we have to look after them. If there are landlord works, then they're through service charges, and our managing agents do those. So that's the kind of property management stuff. Asset management is work that we expect to do that could enhance the value of the asset, and that really applies whether we were selling or not selling. So a lot of the portfolio, when we bought it, had quite short leases. So you might have a very good quality tenant. We have just sold, but we had B&Q on the roundabout in Glastonbury, very good investment. But the one disadvantage that actually meant we could afford to buy it cheaply enough was that B&Q were only committed on their lease, I think, for, let's say, another 4 years. And so asset management is trying to find a point where you can engage the tenant to either take out a break option that means the lease goes, or if it was just a lease ending, then to get them into a new lease, which we were able to do on that property. The other most likely area is where we get a vacancy, either the whole of the property vacant or part of the property, then the asset management is managing the reletting so that we're trying to get 100% income return from each asset for as long as we can, and that's really the sweet spot of both revenue return to us or value in the investment market.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And that's the work that you and your small team are doing every day.
I'd say Brendan is really our specialist superstar in that, and he works relentlessly on it and pulls rabbits out of the hat pretty much all the time. And that kind of feeds through into, that's the tipping point, if you remember, in our strategic goals, that we didn't want to try to sell properties where there was a kind of latent potential for them to become more valuable without concluding those. And we've definitely performed more strongly than we expected to on that.
Take the opportunity to thank Brendan and Charlie, working with you as well, for your good work here. Sarah, did you want to come back?
I wanted to, I don't think you actually mentioned rent reviews, maybe you did, but that is a really big area and it's really important, particularly in a situation where quite a lot of the market has fallen. So you're in a difficult situation on a upwards only rent review to get to something meaningful. And I know we've had to do that with some of our properties. We've had to rejig the rent in order to extend the term, but that is the management way to do it. If you want to make the property more valuable and in the market, if with a longer lease. The other thing is about asset management. Presumably that involves occasionally visiting the properties and checking whether the repairs are being kept up.
Yes, so we, as our team, we aim to see each property not less than once a year, and so that'll be a blend. That quite often there are practical reasons why you go to meet the tenant or whatever, but if we haven't, then we aim to go and see them. And now we've got external managing agents for all of them. Then they have locally based management teams. So actually, we've got more contact with the properties. Coming back on the rent reviews, I slightly overlook it because either our leases are too short to have rent reviews in them, or there isn't really growth in rents. You know, as a person who's been working as a surveyor for 40 years, in my early career, when we had lots of inflation in the rent market, it was a massive thing all the time. Leases were long and rents always went up. We have lots of rent reviews where we have to settle for nothing, because fortunately they can only go upwards on most commercial leases. We also have some that increasingly rents are indexed now, not done by negotiation. And then yes, with high street retail, we have the pain. You'll remember we started with 4 high street retail investments, and the passing rent on each of them was well above the market value, and you eventually have to trade keeping the tenant longer for letting them rebase the rent down to the market.
Thank you, Robert. It's very clear it's a very specialised business. Colleagues, Theo, Mike, any questions? Mike, anything? No questions. So I'll go to other members in the room and then I'll go to other members online. So first, Councillor Farberhigh, and your question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Robert, for going through the report. Much appreciated. The scale of assets is really, the sale of the asset is really to keep the council afloat, due to social care and the financial emergencies, which we totally understand. But my question is, looking at table 2, with the disposal being on track, it does not show the council's commitment to any borrowing. So I fear that, we're looking at one side of the project being conducted, but not the other side. Now, might we be buying a bigger problem in medium to long term? And what I would have liked to have seen is, okay, we're going to potentially acquire £80 million this year plus, but what are our commitments with our borrowing, so that we can actually have a clear understanding of where we are actually going? Thank you.
Robert, before you answer, I'd just like to point out that in order to answer that question for you, Councillor Farberhigh, we will need to be in the confidential session as part of this meeting. That doesn't mean we don't want to answer it for you. We want it to be answered fully correctly. And as I've referred to one paper already being deferred, if you don't mind, we'll come back to your question when we're in confidential session. Now I'll go online and Councillor Mandy Chilcott. Mandy, please.
Good morning, committee. Just a couple of questions, if I may. The first one, and I don't know if I'm reading the table wrong, is around table 1. So we've got total contracted annual income there at 14 million. When I look at the total we've got sort of in pipeline included, we're at 105 million. So I'm making that, if I'm reading it correctly, almost 14% when you put your loss of income against income from the sales. The reason I asked that is none of the properties we had sort of saw anything like that return-wise. So if someone could just explain that bit in the table for me, that would be helpful. Do you want me to do all my questions, Liz, or one at a time?
Let's take that one now. So I'm going to go
Thank
to
you.
Maria first and then Robert if we need to add more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the portfolio value that you're referring to is not the portfolio value that is our total investment portfolio, Councillor Chilcott. The individual properties will have individual income streams and they'll be at various different percentages. So look at it as one number against a portfolio number that's not the total portfolio number. I can see why you've arrived at that percentage, but that's not the percentage. What I can do is provide that in the confidential session or outside of this meeting.
Thank you. That's just how the table reads. So what you're saying is that 14 million across the whole of our portfolio then, as opposed to what we are looking at in table 2. Is that correct?
Right. Can I go to you, Robert, for that? I think that's correct, but please.
I think possibly I have caused a bit of confusion because I'm mixing some points about revenue and some about capital. So if you take the global numbers, when we had the whole portfolio, we identified it was worth in capital terms about 200 million. The revenue, the income is round about 20 million, so roughly 10% return on the value, and so roughly the 10% is a fair guidance, also easy for my mental arithmetic. So the remaining 14 million a year of income sits quite sensibly with where we are in terms of selling properties that we've got at that time about 140 million pounds worth of property left. So we're still seeing around about 10% return. And I think I've just confused you, but
yeah, thank you.
The 105 was the total, and there's also a timing mismatch that the table 1 table we took the cut off of the 31st of December because we work in quarters, whereas table 2 we squeezed in an update because we actually had 3 completions after 31st of January, but before we finalised the report.
Thank you. I couldn't have got to that unless you told me, so thank you for that. Perhaps it total contract.
If I could just come back in something where we say nominal and real, it might just be helpful to us as members to have actually a date at which it's real. So I'd be very happy. I'm sorry, I've lost you off the screen. I hope you're still there. If where it says real and then it was brackets, the date at which that number was defined, that would be helpful, I think.
Thank you. Actually agree. And I got totally lost in that. So like I said, any assistance for next report would be really helpful. The next question is just to do with the asset management in general. And when I went back to our assets management strategy that was done only a couple of years ago, there was a high figure there around priority repairs. So there's no mention anywhere in this management around priority repairs. I'm just asking that question because that obviously will have a budgetary impact. So is that something you keep an eye on as an executive or not, because that will affect values? That's my second question. I'm talking very generically, so hopefully we're okay in public domain still.
Thank you for keeping your questions generic. Go to Robert on this, if I may, please.
Thank you. So the asset management strategy document has been written for the entirety of the council's property estate. This subcommittee exclusively deals with the property investment portfolio, so, which is that narrowly defined
Okay.
list of specific addresses. As a generalization, commercial investors invest for clear income, so they don't expose themselves in general to directly dealing with repairs. Tenants deal with repairs. So those tools that we use in the corporate estate of priority repairs are not translated to the commercial investment. And whilst I wouldn't want to say that our 40 odd assets are totally perfect, they are relatively new, clean, clear assets, and if they're single let, the full repairing responsibility sits with the tenant, and there isn't a funding pot in general. We will have an item coming up later about what happens when you get to the end of a lease. We typically have to put some money in at that point, and that's built into our historic models, that we set aside a percentage of all of the rents that we collected and created a capital reserve that gave us cover against that. But because you don't really know whether a tenant will go at the end of a lease or whether we'll manage to keep them, we have to do it in a kind of averaged out way rather than targeted to the property.
Thank you. It's just that reassurance that what we have got is being looked after. So thank you for that response. My next question is around table 2, and we've got the estimate for 24-25 of 80 million, and we're now including what's in progress at about 105 million. So a couple of questions around that, and again I will keep it generic. So in the audit committee some time ago there was a report saying that if you sold the whole portfolio at that point there would be a loss in value compared to purchase cost. I'm just wondering, will it be captured anywhere what the sale price is against purchase? And I know it's not a pure figure, but just from the public's point of view, I think it's made clear in that audit report that we would sell effectively at a loss, but I'm not seeing that recorded or captured anywhere. And I don't think that would respond to a specific property, but certainly in a report like this you could do a figure that covered all that's going on. So that's my next question, and I have one other, Chair, if you'll allow.
Thank you. If I can just come back in on that one quickly, because you'll recall, I hope you heard me say that item 7 has been deferred to a later meeting.
Right.
And so I'd ask you to put your question on hold until we get to that deferred paper at a later meeting, because your concerns are shared by members across the council. Please be assured of that. So if you had one more question, did I?
Sorry, have we got an idea when that's coming back, Liz? Any ideas?
I'm looking to my right to 151 and Deputy 151 officers, and I know they're working on it. I asked Nicola Hicks earlier today whether we were looking at days, weeks, months. It's certainly not months.
Okay,
it needs to be, if it's weeks, it needs to be a short number of weeks. We're budget setting at the moment, so I appreciate the pressures on the finance team while we're moving through to budget setting, but this is a very important part of our business as a council, and so it will be as soon as possible. I know what our next scheduled date is for the next subcommittee, but if we need to move further forward and put in an additional meeting, then I'll speak to the Leader of Council, of course, because he chairs this subcommittee, but we will look to see if that's possible, if we need to do it. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. My very last question is, obviously we are planning to receive more in than the initial, I'll call it a target figure was, and that target figure is a lot more than we've asked for in our capitalisation directive. But my question is, in terms of this year's budget and budget setting, which you've just mentioned, how much have we sort of allowed for that loss of income from sales in this year? And therefore, how much are we sort of going to allow next year, bearing in mind it's a moving feat at the moment? Thank you.
So I can assure you that that has been put into budget setting as a pressure, the loss of that income. I'll hand over to Maria Christofi, our 151 officer, if she wants to enlarge on that answer at all.
Thank you.
In the month 7 in the in-year position, the budget pressure that's coming through in terms of the commercial income is transparently reported within the report. I'm just trying to find the number for you so that we can.
Don't worry, I can find it.
And we're, as part of the phasing of the acceleration of selling the assets, we have looked at that. So I built that into the medium-term financial strategy in terms of the pressures. So as we bring the budget reports and the medium-term financial strategy and plan back to executive and through to council, it will be transparently there.
Thank you. So in your budgeting and forward budgeting, I'm thinking forward, I think the plan was to sell all. So presumably most of that will be included moving forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
If I could just come in there again. I remember Jason Vaughan, when he was our 151 officer, he put that figure on one line across 3 years when he was budget setting. And what Maria's done as our interim 151 is what I'd call reprofile that to take account of the higher target for the year we're in at the moment and what looks like a likelihood to overachieve on that target. So I think we're really clear. I think we were really clear about that income being written down, if you like, across 3 years, and the fact that it's now been reprofiled because of the higher target. And that is, as Robert has already said, that nominal versus real is changing sometimes weekly, sometimes from one day to another. And so I think it's really important, the same as when we're presenting on risks, we kind of need to know, because it takes a while, doesn't it, for papers to get through the writing, the approving, the publishing, and get to the actual date of the meeting. It's often really helpful, as the risk reports do on IdeaGen, that they actually come out with a date on them of when those risks were produced. And I think on these papers we can improve by putting dates again on the real figures.
Thank you very much. It was just because we're differing from the profile at the moment looking at these, but thank you for the questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. So do I have any further questions on this item? No further questions. In that case, I'll go to the recommendations. So A is to note the performance indicators for the asset management of commercial investment portfolio for Q3 2024-25, as shown in tables 1, 2 and 3. And B, to note the main risks to the programme set out under paragraph 10. We've not mentioned those risks, but we've all read them. We all know that they're there in the paper. So I know this is a noting, not a voting, but I want to be assured that we are, as members of this subcommittee, all happy to note. So I'm seeing nodding at the table. So we note both of those items. And now what I would like to do while we're still in public session is move up item 10, which is the appointment of council directors to council companies, as this is to be in public session. And so it makes sense for everybody for us to take this item now. And I think I'm going to hand over to Alan Jones to take this item, because on here it says Liz Lichen to introduce the item and then invite Mel Locke to add additional points. I think that Alan Jones is going to take this for us. I hope I'm right.
I'll do my best for you, Chair. So in essence, the paper is really quite simple. We need to ensure that we have appropriate representation with the Aspen House board, and we need to ensure that as part of this process, what's being recommended to members today, that we are substituting the respective board members that have now either left the organisation or changed position, and also referencing the fact that we now need to ensure that we've got representation from adults and housing, given the changes into the structure. Chair, to be quite frank, it's no more complicated than that as part of the proposal, but it does require the decision of this committee to make that assignment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I just look at Sarah as lead member for adults and housing and homelessness, whether you wanted to say anything.
No, I think it's really important that now we have housing in our portfolio. We have directors or in my portfolio of this company that are part of that. And it's essential, obviously, that we have 3. I think we've only got 1 at the moment. That's probably right. I did have a quick word with Mel about it yesterday. Perfectly happy about it. Doesn't really know much about it yet, but I explained to her it was an investment made by Sedgemoor Council, I think, and it's some flats, which I think, I don't know what the future holds for them, but it's certainly being considered, and you need a full board to do that.
So at this stage, we're not considering anything further about Aspen. We are just looking at appointing directors to the company. So do we have any further questions from colleagues in the room or online? Nothing? No. Okay, so I'll go to the recommendations, and they are that this executive subcommittee 1 nominates and appoints Mel Locke, the Executive Director for Adult Services, and Kirsty Larkins, Interim Service Director for Housing, as council appointed directors to the board of Aspen Housing and Development Limited, company number 100000266 with immediate effect. And secondly, nominates and appoints Mel Locke, Executive Director, and Kirsty Larkins, Interim Service Director, as council appointed directors to the board of Sedgemoor Group Limited, company number 100845596 with immediate effect. So if I could please, I just need to check with Alan Jones, who's monitoring officer as well, that you are satisfied that Mel Locke and Kirsty Larkins have agreed to these appointments.
Yes, both have confirmed they're agreed to, and their names will be registered as part of the company's register and registered on Companies House as appropriate. So both have confirmed that.
Okay, thank you. So if I could have a proposer for this, please. So proposed by Sarah Wakefield. Oh,
May I just actually?
I'm just in the middle of proposing and seconding. If you have a question, we can come back to it in a minute, but let's as the members of the subcommittee didn't have any questions on this, I'm sorry, I didn't go to other members, but I thought I had, but maybe not. So I've got a proposer in Sarah Wakefield. I need a seconder, Councillor Theo Butt-Phillips. So all in favour? Thank you. So while we're still in public session, Councillor Farber-High, was there something that you wanted to understand about this?
I think this role is vitally important, and I think to have an understanding of commercial world is quite good. And I was just wondering whether a course can be put together for the various directors to understand the commercial side of doing business before they actually sit on that board.
So I'd say actually one of the things that I always expected to be a benefit of unitarisation was pulling adult services and housing together. So I know that Kirsty Larkins has a housing background, which will include such things. I take your point that it's not as usual for somebody who's an executive director on adult social care as Mel Locke has been, but she's taken, housing is now under her with Kirsty Larkins in post as an interim. I'm sure they know what they're taking on, but we will make sure, I will ask the finance team and everyone else to make sure, and the monitoring officer to make sure that those officers have all the training they need at any point in their journey as directors of these 2 companies. And Alan Jones, please.
Chair, if I may, and just to reassure members, prior to the signature of entering into the board, all members are made aware of that board, are made aware of their responsibilities, their obligations as part of that process. And one of the things we'll be reflecting on as part of our overall review of boards that are outside of the core organisation is reflect that we have sufficient training in place for all those people that are on those boards. So there are a number of officers and members, for that matter, that sit on boards, and it's just part of that regular review, as we do have a number of external companies that we are represented on. Thank you, Chair.
So yeah, we have external companies. We also have outside bodies where people, including me, are directors. And one of the things we're hoping to do this summer, if we ever get time, is to go through every single outside body and confirm whether they're still needed, whether they're still active, and whether the members named as directors are still active, and if they're not active, to actually remove them as directors from those companies. Or perhaps I know of one company that's closing because it's no longer needed in the community. So that is a piece of work where I'm working with Democratic Services already. So I take your point. Although we've done the approving the recommendations, I've now got Councillor Sue Osborne and I've got Jill Byron online, so it would make sense, Jill, if we could take you first, please.
Yes, it was just to assure members that legal services support the operation of the boards of these companies, and we will be doing a training and orientation session for new directors once they're appointed.
Thank you, Jill. And Councillor Sue Osborne, did you want to come in and ask a question?
Well, it's not a question really, and I sort of was a bit slow getting my hand up earlier, but I'd just like to endorse Kirsty as a former South Somerset District Councillor for the role. She did housing for us. She also was involved with the commercial side as well. And having worked with Kirsty ever since I was elected in 2011, I can certainly testify to Kirsty's talent and skill. And having worked with Mel as an opposition spokesman in adult social care, I think you've got two good sound directors there, and I'm sure they'll do a really good job for us in that role, and perhaps ensure that opportunities within Aspen to meet our housing aspirations are fully met. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you. And I'm equally sure that Kirsty Larkins wouldn't have been appointed to that role if she were not able to fulfil the entire job description more than adequately. So I was really delighted actually, because unlike former South Somerset councillors, I didn't know that was Kirsty's background. So I was really delighted that she was appointed to that role. It's a really important one for us.
And I have to say I was. I think that.
So we're finished on item 10 now. Item 7, as I've already said, is deferred. But I now have to ask this subcommittee to agree the following resolution to exclude the press and public so that we go into private session. So we need to consider passing a resolution having been duly proposed and seconded, and in accordance with Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meeting and Access to Information, England Regulations 2012, that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of those parts of this agenda which relate to exempt information, on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the press and public were present, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information. The reason being information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. So I look for a proposer, please. Proposed by Sarah Wakefield, seconded by Theo Butt-Philip, and all in favour, please. Thank you very much. So at this point, members of the public and press are asked to leave the meeting.